All right, guys, so continuing with my 2024 college football schedule previews, we're moving on to the ACC. We're taking a look at Florida State, Clemson, as well as Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame is an independent, but they normally always play majority ACC games, and this upcoming year is no different. So we will begin with Florida State, and unfortunately for both Florida State and Clemson, their full schedule is not done. So you can take a look at the left side. It says, August 24th. That's actually a week 0 game, by the way. They're playing in Dublin, Ireland. I believe they get a bye week 1, Florida State, because they go overseas. They get a bye week 1, and then there you can see week 2. They will be facing Memphis at home. Kind of a weird start to the season for FSU, breaking in DJ Uiagalelei. It'll be interesting. Georgia Tech, certainly you would expect an easy 17 to 20 point win there. Memphis could be annoying coming back from Ireland. And then there you can see on the left, the Notre Dame game is very late into the season. Florida State will play at Notre Dame. That is another non-conference game. That's going to be very tough for them. Notre Dame, with their senior-laden team, they just got Riley Leonard in the transfer portal. Charleston Southern they will face on the 23rd. And then Florida, the annual rivalry game, they get Florida at home. Certainly very winnable there. But just looking at those games, Memphis could be tough. Notre Dame's going to be very tough. And then looking at the routine conference games, all of these games are to be determined. They are at Duke, so Duke lost their quarterback, they lost their head coach, but they did get Malik Murphy from Texas, an interesting transfer. That could be a surprisingly tough game going on the road, but you would certainly favor FSU in that. Boston College at home, that's an easy win. California at home in a conference game, you gotta love it. That should be an easy win with Cal joining the league. You get Clemson at home. Clemson will be interesting next year. Nobody really knows. Seemed like everyone thought they were going to be back to themselves this past season, possibly be in contention for a playoff spot. It didn't happen. They lost 2 times early in the season. North Carolina at home, very winnable. At Miami, that could be annoying. We don't really know if Miami's ever going to have a breakout season, but based on their NIL recruiting, it could happen at any point. And then there's another beautiful ACC game on the road at SMU. It's a de facto non-conference game. That's what it is. Florida State at SMU is a non-conference game, and I like it. I like having these different matchups personally. That should be a fun one. SMU possibly. I believe they're returning Preston Stone, the quarterback. He is coming off an injury, but SMU had a very nice season. That's an SMU team that was in contention for a New Year's Six bowl game. Losing their quarterback really hurt them, but overall, looking at this schedule, it's a typical ACC schedule. There's nothing terribly hard about it. For FSU, the thing that makes this schedule less manageable is the Memphis game and also the game at Notre Dame. So it's a little bit tougher in terms of that, but you get Clemson at home and you get North Carolina at home, the ACC next year. It's going to be a watered-down conference. It is what it is. In Florida State, look, they don't have to face themselves, so it should be relatively easy for them. But overall, I do see at least 2 losses next year for Florida State, probably at Notre Dame, and then maybe they drop a home game or at Miami. But it is very hard to predict because of the quarterback situation. Next, moving on to Clemson. You can see they have 4 games with dates that are scheduled. So August 31st, week 1, the kickoff game. It's going to be brutal for Clemson. They're playing a de facto road game, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, technically considered neutral site, but Georgia possibly going to be the number 1 team in the nation next year, especially with Alabama losing Nick Saban. I would say Georgia's going to be 1. Depending on what happens with Michigan, maybe if they return J.J. McCarthy and Harbaugh, they would put Michigan at 2, Ohio State at 3. But yeah, Georgia is going to be number 1, I would guess for sure. Appalachian State's a decent team, That could be an annoying game, but you would expect to win. The Citadel, that'll be really late in the season, second to last week, and then the rivalry game against South Carolina. So the non-conference, you would expect a 3-1 record, the loss to Georgia, and then beating App State, the Citadel, along with South Carolina. And then looking at their conference games, once again, the dates are not scheduled, so this is not the right order. They get Louisville at home. I'm expecting Louisville to take kind of a step back next year. I think they'll lose 3 or 4 games. NC State at home. NC State's a sneaky team. I'm not sure what they return, though. Stanford at home. So Stanford traveling to Clemson. That's got SEC written all over it. That's beautiful. Virginia at home, very winnable. At FSU, that's going to be tough, no doubt, but I think it's winnable for Clemson. People are going to be underrating Clemson next year. They're going to have more of a senior-laden offense. At Pittsburgh, very winnable. At Virginia Tech, extremely winnable. At Wake Forest. This ACC is the gift that keeps on giving for a team like Clemson if they're trying to get back into the playoff picture now with the 12-team playoff, possibly losing 2 games and still making it. But I think it's going to be tougher for members of the ACC to make this playoff. Looking at the schedule, I really like what I see. I mean, the Florida State game is tough. Outside of that, you're going to lose to Georgia very likely, but those are the home slate is just ridiculous. Louisville, NC State, Stanford, Virginia, App State, the Citadel, South Carolina, all at home. The Georgia game, again, is neutral site, but it's very, very manageable when it comes to Clemson's 2024 schedule, so we will see. And then looking at the independent Notre Dame, all of their games are officially set, so we don't have to worry about that. You can see week 1, they are on the road at Texas A&M, kind of a zesty matchup. That's going to be an annoying matchup for Notre Dame. They might even be like 3-point underdogs, honestly, based on the talent that Texas A&M has. They got the new coach. They got rid of Jimbo Fisher, maybe a little bit rejuvenated. A&M did lose a bunch in the portal. We kind of expected that to happen based off of the past few years and how their 2022 class hasn't performed. Northern Illinois goes to Notre Dame. That should be a win for Notre Dame, although it always seems like Notre Dame plays down to a team like a MAC team every year or like a bad group of 5 team. Either way, we will see. On the road at Purdue, you would figure Notre Dame, very winnable game there. Purdue, it can be a kind of a hostile environment, but it just depends what time that game's at. If it's at noon, it should be fine for Notre Dame. Miami of Ohio, that'll be a free win for Notre Dame. They get Louisville at home. I'm not very high on Louisville again. I think that should be an easy win. Stanford at home, that's another very winnable game. At Georgia Tech, very winnable. Versus Navy, very winnable. FSU, but you get them at home. That's manageable if you are Notre Dame. Not saying Notre Dame's going to win or even be the favorites, but late into the season, I could see that where FSU already has 2 losses. Notre Dame, they're in a weird spot right now. They've got to love the expansion to the 12-team playoff because as an independent, Notre Dame had basically no margin for error because they didn't have that extra data point of a conference championship game. So I'm guessing they're loving the expansion. They could potentially lose 2 games, completely sit out conference championships and still make the playoff as an independent. That's kind of a glitch for the independent with the expansion to the 12-team playoff. Now they have a big margin for error and they don't have to worry about losing that extra game. Virginia at home, that's a free win. At USC is brutal. USC is going to be, I think, really improved next year with Miller Moss, Lincoln Riley getting a totally revamped defense. So at your Notre Dame, you're looking at the A&M game in week 1. You got to win that somehow. It's going to be close. It's probably going to be lower scoring. It's going to be ugly. You know, it's week 1 of college football season. These are young kids. We know how ugly week 1 normally is. Just get the job done. Go win 20-17. Nobody will even remember it later in the season. But other than that, I think if you can win that week 1 game with Riley Leonard, you are pretty much home free. Holy crap. Northern Illinois at Purdue, Miami of Ohio, Louisville at home, Stanford at Georgia Tech, versus Navy. And then, I mean, you're home free until you face Florida State. Notre Dame could be undefeated late into the season into October and possibly be undefeated in a home matchup with Florida State. Worst case scenario, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you would want to go into that Florida State game with just 1 loss. And I wonder what Notre Dame's case would be if they lost to Florida State and A&M, or let's just say they lost to Florida State and USC but won every other game, so they finished 10-2. Obviously, there's no conference championship. Would they still make the playoff? It's something to kind of gauge when you're talking about an independent team. How many games can they lose without having the extra conference championship game there as well? But just taking a look at all of these schedules, I mean, the ACC, you can just tell it is a lot easier. I mean, Clemson's schedule is very easy, just looking at it. Florida State, the reason Florida State's schedule is a little bit tougher, they go on the road to Notre Dame. They're going to have a pretty good home schedule just looking at it. Clemson goes to FSU, but they don't face Notre Dame. And FSU hosts Clemson, but they travel to Notre Dame. So it's like this weird round robin. But either way, guys, it'll be interesting with the new teams in the ACC. Florida State traveling on the road to SMU. You've also got the exotic matchup of Stanford visiting Clemson. That'll be happening next year, but that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.